Welcome to Untold Parallels, where history isn't just told, it's relived. We bring you the forgotten echoes from the past, the legends once whispered as truth, and the impossible feats that shaped our world. I'm Jacob, and in this two-part journey, we enter one of history's most dramatic turning points, the Fall of Constantinople. The year is 1453 AD, and the city that had stood for over 1,000 years faces its final siege. A city of prophets, emperors, and warriors, believed by many to be divinely protected. Yet, even walls said to be unbreakable can crumble. Tonight, in Part 1, we set the stage for the siege that ended the medieval world. The Fall of Constantinople. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had stood as the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire. Founded by Emperor Constantine the Great in 330 AD, it was built upon the ruins of Byzantium, a small Greek settlement. But Constantine envisioned something greater, a new Rome, a city that would be the bridge between East and West. Its strategic position on the Bosporus meant it controlled trade between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Whoever held Constantinople could choke or empower commerce across Europe and Asia. Its walls, known as the Theodosian Walls, were legendary. Built in 413 to 414 AD under Emperor Theodosius II, they were a marvel of engineering, 3 layers thick, with towers, moats, and battlements that stretched for miles. Emperor Theodosius II, born in 401 AD, ascended to the Eastern Roman throne in 408 AD at the tender age of 7, following the death of his father, Arcadius. With a childhood spent under the guidance of regents and his sister Pulcheria, Theodosius grew into a ruler more concerned with administration, law, and scholarship than with warfare. He is best remembered for commissioning the Theodosian Walls of Constantinople between 13 and 14 AD, fortifications so formidable that they would protect the city for over a millennium. In 438 AD, he oversaw the creation of the Codex Theodosianus, a comprehensive compilation of Roman laws that would influence legal systems for generations. Historical sources give only limited information about Theodosius II's physical appearance, and much of it is inferred from coins, statues, and contemporary descriptions rather than detailed accounts. He was often depicted in imperial iconography with the traditional stylized features of Byzantine emperors, a youthful face, a slender build, and wearing the ceremonial robes and diadem of the emperor. A devout supporter of Christianity, Theodosius enforced orthodox beliefs and sought to suppress pagan practices, reinforcing the Nicene Creed as the empire's religious foundation. Though cautious and at times timid in matters of military command, he surrounded himself with capable generals and scholars, fostering the intellectual and cultural life of Constantinople. His reign ended unexpectedly in 450 AD when he was struck by a falling roof tile during construction, an unusual and tragic accident. Despite his personal limitations on the battlefield, Theodosius II's enduring legacies, the unbreakable walls and codified laws, cemented his place in history as a ruler whose foresight shaped the Byzantine Empire for centuries to come. For centuries, these walls had turned back invaders. Persians in the 6th century, Arabs in the 7th and 8th centuries, Bulgarians in the 9th century, all had tested them, and most had failed. Only once, during the Fourth Crusade in 1204 AD, had the city been captured, and even then, the Byzantines reclaimed it in 1261 AD. To many, Constantinople seemed eternal. But legends and prophecies swirled around this city. Orthodox Christians believed it was divinely chosen, the Second Rome, destined to last until the end of days. Yet there was another, darker prophecy: the city will fall when the moon is in eclipse. This prediction, remembered by both citizens and priests, would soon terrify Constantinople, for in May 1453 AD, the moon itself seemed to turn against them. By the mid-15th century, the Byzantine Empire was only a shadow of its former self. Once stretching across the Mediterranean, By 1453 AD it was reduced to little more than Constantinople itself and a few scattered outposts in the Aegean. Its emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, had reigned since 1449 AD, ruling over a city of perhaps 50,000 people, down from hundreds of thousands in its prime. Yet despite its weakness, the city's symbolic power was immense. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, born in 1405 AD, was the last ruler of the Byzantine Empire, ascending to the throne in 1449 AD. He was renowned for his courage, determination, and unyielding sense of duty, inheriting an empire already diminished but still rich in culture, history, and spiritual significance. Physically, Constantine XI was described as tall, strong, and commanding, with a presence that inspired loyalty and admiration among his people. He was deeply religious, often engaging in prayer and acts of devotion alongside his citizens, embodying the unity of emperor and people. His reign, though brief, was marked by a focus on strengthening the city, maintaining morale, and preserving the heritage of Byzantium. Constantine XI became a symbol of steadfast resistance and hope, a ruler whose personal valor and sense of honor elevated him beyond mere politics. Over time, myths and legends grew around his figure, portraying him as the marble emperor, said to be resting beneath the city, awaiting the moment when Constantinople might rise again. His life stands as a testament to courage, integrity, and the enduring spirit of a civilization aware of its historical significance yet resolute in the face of its challenges. Constantine XI himself was a man of courage and conviction. He knew his empire's days were numbered, but he was determined that Constantinople would not fall easily. He rallied his people, prepared the defenses, and prayed for a miracle. He would become, in the end, a tragic figure, remembered as the last Roman emperor, the man who chose to die with his city rather than flee. Facing Constantine was a young man who would change the course of history, Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire. He was born in 1432 AD and was a young yet extraordinary ruler whose ambition and intellect set him apart even among the most powerful leaders of his era. Ascending to the throne at the age of 19 in 1451 AD, Mehmed was known for his remarkable combination of strategic brilliance, curiosity, and determination. Physically, he was described as tall, strong, and energetic, with a commanding presence that inspired both respect and loyalty from his followers. Mehmed was fluent in several languages, a patron of the arts and sciences, and deeply interested in history, philosophy, and architecture, qualities that reflected a ruler intent on not only conquest but also the lasting legacy of his reign. He was disciplined and methodical, capable of both meticulous planning and bold action, earning a reputation as a visionary leader. Stories of his courage, decisiveness, and personal involvement in military campaigns circulated widely, painting him as a figure who led by example. Even in his youth, Mehmed was seen as destined for greatness, and his contemporaries believed he was guided by fate to achieve monumental accomplishments, leaving a legacy that would be remembered for centuries. Only 21 years old when he marched on Constantinople in 1453 AD, he was ambitious beyond measure. Fluent in several languages, fascinated by science, and a master strategist, he was determined to seize Constantinople and make it the jewel of his empire. Muslim chroniclers often pointed to a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, spoken in the 7th century, "Constantinople shall be conquered." What a wonderful commander will that conqueror be, and what a wonderful army will that army be. Mehmed believed he was destined to fulfill this prophecy. And so, he prepared an army of staggering size for the time. Around 80,000 soldiers gathered, cavalry, infantry, and his elite janissaries, an elite corps trained from childhood to be the Sultan's most loyal warriors. Alongside them marched engineers, labourists, and a fleet of ships. Against them stood only about 7,000 defenders, including 700 Genoese mercenaries under Giovanni Giustiniani. The odds were impossible. Yet the Byzantines had something the Ottomans feared, the walls of Constantinople, said to be unbreachable. Mehmed was not deterred. He had a secret weapon: cannons. Gunpowder had only recently become a significant force in European warfare, first appearing in Europe around the 13th century, and the Ottomans were quick to adopt it. Among the weapons Mehmed brought was the basilica cannon. The basilica cannon was a weapon of almost mythical proportions, a monstrous creation that seemed to defy the very limits of human engineering. Forged in 1452 AD by the Hungarian engineer Orban, it stretched over 27 feet long and could hurl stone balls weighing as much as 600 pounds. Moving it required a small army of men and dozens of oxen, yet its sheer size and power made it impossible to ignore. When fired, the earth itself seemed to tremble as walls shook and stones shattered like pebbles. Contemporary witnesses described the thunderous roar echoing across miles, a sound that blended awe with terror. The basilica cannon was more than just a tool of war. It was a herald of a new age, a terrifying demonstration that no wall, no matter how thick, could withstand the relentless force of gunpowder and human ingenuity. Its legend grew with every blast, cementing its place in history as one of the most formidable and unforgettable weapons ever created. When tested in 1452 AD, its first shot reportedly destroyed walls miles away. Legend tells that Orban had first offered this incredible weapon to the Byzantines, but they couldn't afford him. Spurned, he turned to the Ottomans, sealing the city's fate. The use of these massive bombards would change warfare forever. No longer were walls impregnable. The thunder of gunpowder marked the dawn of a new era, and Constantinople would be its most famous victim. The siege began on April 6, 1453 AD. For nearly 2 months, the cannons roared day and night. The ground shook with every impact, and the air filled with smoke and dust. The defenders scrambled constantly, patching holes in the walls with rubble, timber, and even furniture. Every night, citizens, men, women, and children alike, worked by torchlight to rebuild what had been shattered during the day. Inside the city, fear mingled with faith. Priests led processions carrying icons of the Virgin Mary, believed to shield the city from harm. Yet there were ominous signs. One chronicle records that an icon of the Virgin slipped from its bearer's hands during a procession, falling to the ground. The people gasped. It was taken as a terrible omen. Food grew scarce. Families huddled in tunnels to escape bombardment, rationing bread and water. Some accounts even suggest that the most desperate resorted to eating pets or vermin to survive. The sound of cannons became the soundtrack of daily life, a reminder that the end could come at any moment. If the walls were the city's strongest defense on land, the great iron chain across the Golden Horn was its shield at sea. This enormous chain, first installed in 717 AD during the Arab sieges, stretched across the harbor, blocking enemy ships from entering. For centuries, it had protected the city from naval assault. This massive chain stretched across the Golden Horn, a barrier so formidable that no enemy ship could penetrate the harbor while it was raised. Each iron link, enormous and heavy, was crafted to withstand both force and fire, and the chain could be lifted or lowered as the situation demanded, almost like a living, mechanical guardian. To the citizens of Constantinople, it was a source of pride and security. To any would-be invader, it was a terrifying, almost supernatural obstacle. Chroniclers of the time described it as a marvel of engineering, capable of turning the tide of war before a single soldier even set foot on the walls. Tales spread that the chain was unbreakable, a divine safeguard blessed by heaven itself, and it became as much a part of the city's legend as its walls and cathedrals. The very sight of it stretched across the water struck awe and fear into the hearts of those who dared approach, reinforcing the idea that Constantinople was a city protected not just by men, but by the brilliance and will of generations. But Mehmed was relentless. In one of the most audacious feats of engineering in medieval warfare, he ordered his men to drag nearly 70 ships over land on April 22, 1453 AD. He ordered his men to drag the ships over hills, valleys, and rough terrain to reach the harbor on the other side of the chain. Logs were greased, ropes tightened, and hundreds of soldiers and laborers strained with all their strength as the vessels creaked and groaned under the effort. To the citizens of Constantinople, who watched in disbelief from the city walls, it seemed a feat beyond human capability, almost supernatural. Chroniclers called it a miracle of Satan and described the terror that swept through the defenders, realizing that no barrier, not even the mighty chain, could hold back the Sultan's determination. This incredible act of ingenuity was not just a tactical maneuver, it was psychological warfare, a demonstration that sheer determination, planning, and human effort could overcome even the most legendary defenses. The sight of Ottoman ships appearing inside the Golden Horn, where the chain had stood unbroken for centuries, sent a wave of panic through the city and marked one of the most dramatic moments in medieval military history. Greased logs and sheer manpower carried the vessels across hills and valleys, bypassing the chain entirely. When the citizens of Constantinople awoke to see Ottoman ships inside their harbor, they were struck with horror. To many, it seemed supernatural. This was more than a tactical victory, it was a breaking point. The defenders realized that nothing, not even the Great Chain, could stop the Sultan's determination. And then came the omen that shook the city to its core. On May 22, 1453 AD, a lunar eclipse darkened the night sky. For centuries, a prophecy had circulated that Constantinople would fall when the moon was in eclipse. The sight of the darkened moon filled the defenders with dread. Some tried to reassure the people, calling it coincidence. But many believed the prophecy had come true, that the heavens themselves had declared the city's fate. As May wore on, the city groaned under constant bombardment. Breaches opened in the walls, only to be patched again and again. Exhaustion consumed the defenders, but they refused to give in. Emperor Constantine XI led from the front, inspiring courage in his men. In Hagia Sophia, the faithful gathered in prayer, begging God to deliver them. Yet omens and prophecies weighed heavily. The fallen icon, the lunar eclipse, the endless thunder of cannons, each seemed to whisper that the end was near. The walls of Constantinople had stood for centuries, but cracks were forming, both in stone and in spirit. By late May 1453 AD, Constantinople had endured nearly 7 weeks of bombardment. The walls bore scars of constant cannon fire, and though patched each night, their strength was failing. The defenders, numbering no more than 7,000, faced exhaustion, hunger, and dwindling hope. In contrast, Sultan Mehmed II still commanded an army of nearly 80,000. On May 23, 1453 AD, the Ottomans launched continuous bombardments, hammering the land walls near the gate of St. Romanus. Each blast shook the ground, reducing stone to rubble. Fires broke out within the city as flaming projectiles soared overhead. The defenders worked without rest, shoring up walls, digging trenches, and praying. It was during these days that a terrible storm hit Constantinople. Lightning struck the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral built in 537 AD, which many saw as the spiritual heart of the empire. Chroniclers recorded that flames seemed to rise from its dome, casting eerie shadows. To many citizens, it was a sign from heaven, a final warning that divine protection had been withdrawn. The Hagia Sophia was not just a building, it was the heart and soul of Constantinople, a cathedral that seemed to touch the heavens themselves. Completed in 537 AD under Emperor Justinian I, and designed by the brilliant architects Isidore of Miletus and Anthemius of Tralles, it was a masterpiece of human ingenuity and divine ambition. Its massive dome soared above the city like a suspended miracle, casting an ethereal light across the vast interior. Walls glittered with golden mosaics, marble floors shimmered beneath the faithful, and intricately carved columns framed the awe-inspiring space. To step inside was to feel the weight of centuries, the presence of emperors, saints, and countless worshippers who had knelt in prayer beneath its soaring arches. For the Byzantines, it was more than a church, it was a symbol of God's favor, the empire's glory, and the unshakable spirit of a city that had stood at the crossroads of the world for over 1,000 years. Legends whispered that the very angels walked its halls, guarding it, and that its sacred aura could protect the city itself. Even as cannon fire and siege engines threatened the walls outside, the Hagia Sophia remained a beacon of faith, awe, and unbroken history, a living testament to the grandeur of Constantinople. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos knew the end was near. On the evening of May 28, 1453 AD, he gathered his advisors, nobles, and military leaders. According to accounts, he gave a final speech, urging unity. He reminded them that they fought not only for their city but for their faith, their families, and the memory of Rome itself. That night, he led a solemn procession to the Hagia Sophia. Citizens filled the church, praying by candlelight. Latin Catholics, Orthodox Greeks, Venetians, and Genoese all knelt together, despite centuries of division. The emperor himself knelt in prayer, seeking forgiveness for his people. Some chroniclers write that tears filled the eyes of hardened soldiers, knowing this would be their last night. A legend grew from this moment, that deep within the Hagia Sophia, an angel appeared and promised that the city would one day return to Christian hands. The angel, it was said, turned the altar into stone and concealed the sacred relics until that day. To this day, some in Greece and Orthodox tradition still whisper that Constantinople will rise again when the time is right. The final assault in the early hours of May 29, 1453 AD, Mehmed II launched his final assault. The attack began before dawn, around 1:30 a.m. Waves of troops surged against the battered walls. First came irregular infantry, meant to exhaust the defenders. Then the real danger. Among the vast army besieging Constantinople, two groups stood out as the harbingers of doom for the city's defenders. The Anatolian troops, seasoned warriors from the rugged heartlands of the Ottoman realm, carried the weight of countless battles on their shoulders. Skilled in sword, spear, and bow, they pressed forward with a relentless rhythm, their movements disciplined and precise, each step a reminder of the empire's unstoppable might. Yet it was the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite corps, that struck true terror into the hearts of those behind Constantinople's legendary walls. Recruited as children from Christian families and trained from the earliest age in loyalty, martial skill, and unwavering obedience, the Janissaries were the embodiment of a warrior's perfection. Clad in their distinctive uniforms and armed with the most advanced weapons of the age, they moved like a tide of steel and determination, surging where the battle demanded, unbroken by cannon fire or arrows. For the Byzantines, merely seeing the organized ranks of these soldiers was enough to sow dread and despair. Together, the Anatolian troops and Janissaries were more than an army, they were a force of inevitability, a living symbol that the old world of Constantinople, with its ancient walls and sacred domes, would soon face the unrelenting march of history. The battle was brutal. The defenders, led by Emperor Constantine and Giovanni Giustiniani, fought desperately. Giovanni Giustiniani was no ordinary soldier either. He was a living legend among mercenaries, a commander whose very presence could rally men in the face of certain death. Hailing from Genoa, he arrived in Constantinople in 1453 AD with a small but elite corps of 700 warriors, tasked with defending the city's most vulnerable walls. Tall, imposing, and exuding authority, Giustiniani moved among the defenders like a force of nature, inspiring courage where fear threatened to take hold. He led from the front, personally directing the shoring of breaches, counterattacks, and the relentless defense against the Ottoman onslaught. Chroniclers wrote of his fearlessness, noting that he never flinched under the roar of cannons or the rain of arrows, and that his leadership held the fraying morale of the city together. Yet even a figure of his caliber could not defy fate forever. When he was gravely wounded in the final hours, panic rippled through the defenders, and the walls he had fought so valiantly to protect began to crumble. Giustiniani's heroism became emblematic of the city's courage, a reminder that even in the shadow of collapse, human valor could burn brighter than the mightiest siege engines. During the battle, arrows, spears, and boiling oil rained down from the walls. Cannons roared as the Ottomans pressed forward. For hours, the defenders held strong. But fate turned against them. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, was struck by a cannonball or crossbow bolt, accounts vary. Gravely wounded, he begged to be carried from the walls. His men, seeing their leader depart, panicked and fled. The defense faltered. At this moment, a massive breach opened near the gate of St. Romanus. The Janissaries poured in. Constantine XI, realizing all was lost, threw off his imperial regalia. Witnesses later said he cried out, "The city has fallen, but I live." He charged into the fray, sword in hand, and was never seen again. His body was never definitively identified. Legend has it that he was turned to marble by an angel at the moment of death, hidden beneath the city, waiting to return when Constantinople is restored. This myth made him known as the Marble Emperor in later Greek folklore. The city falls as the first light of dawn spilled over Constantinople on May 29, 1453 AD. The streets echoed with the thunder of victory and the cries of despair. Sultan Mehmed II's forces poured into the city, their banners waving over the shattered walls and the smoking ruins of towers. Soldiers moved through streets once lined with bustling markets, now silent under the shadow of conquest, seizing what remained and claiming Constantinople was the jewel of the Ottoman Empire. The Hagia Sophia, magnificent and awe-inspiring, became the center of this new rule. Mehmed II himself entered the Hagia Sophia later that day. Struck by its majesty, he ordered it to be converted into a mosque. This act symbolized the transformation of Constantinople from the capital of Byzantium to the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Hagia Sophia's sacred altars were transformed into the Sultan's mosque, the soaring domes now ringing with the call to prayer instead of hymns. Looting lasted for 3 days, a chaotic storm of fire, steel, and greed, as treasures, manuscripts, and sacred relics vanished into the hands of victors. By sunrise, Ottoman banners flew over Constantinople. According to some accounts, priests disappeared mysteriously into the walls during the chaos, a legend that claimed they would return when the church was once again Christian. The Sultan spared much of the city from total destruction, though looting lasted for 3 days, as was customary after a siege. Still, countless treasures, books, and artworks were lost forever. For many in Europe, the fall of Constantinople was like the end of the world. The people of Constantinople, those who survived, watched in fear and sorrow, some hiding in alleys and churches, others taken as captives or enslaved. And yet, even amidst destruction, Mehmed II began to rebuild. He repopulated the city, invited new settlers, and restored markets, ensuring that Constantinople would rise again, not as the heart of Byzantium, but as the thriving capital of a new empire. To the world beyond its walls, the fall of Constantinople was more than a military defeat, it was the end of an era, the collapse of a civilization that had called itself Roman for over a millennium, and the harbinger of a new age where East and West would be forever reshaped. The people of Constantinople had long believed in prophecies. And in those final days, they believed they saw them come true. The lunar eclipse on May 22, 1453 AD fulfilled the ancient prophecy that the city would fall when the moon darkened. The collapsed icon of the Virgin Mary during a procession was seen as a divine withdrawal of protection. The lightning strike on the Hagia Sophia just days before the fall was taken as a heavenly sign of doom. The legend of the Marble Emperor, who sleeps beneath the city, promised hope for a future restoration. Amid the ruins and smoke of Constantinople, stories began to take on a life of their own, weaving myth into the memory of tragedy. Emperor Constantine XI, the last Roman ruler, became immortalized not just for his courage but for the legend that he had not truly perished. Witnesses claimed that at the moment he fell in battle, an angel appeared and turned him into marble, concealing him beneath the city's stones, waiting for the day Constantinople would rise again in Christian hands. This figure, known ever after as the Marble Emperor, became a symbol of hope and defiance, whispered in hushed tones among Greeks and Orthodox Christians for generations. Coupled with the fulfillment of ominous prophecies, these myths transformed the city's fall into something more than a historical event. It became a story of destiny, divine judgment, and the promise of rebirth, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming defeat, the spirit of Constantinople and its emperor lived on in legend. For centuries afterward, these myths gave courage to Greeks and Orthodox Christians living under Ottoman rule. The stories turned tragedy into a kind of sacred promise that Constantinople was not truly lost, only waiting. The dawn of a new world. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, which had lasted for over 1,100 years. It also marked the end of the Middle Ages. Europe was shaken to its core. The great Christian bastion of the East was gone, and trade routes to Asia were now dominated by the Ottomans. This event indirectly sparked the Age of Exploration. European powers, desperate to bypass Ottoman-controlled trade routes, sent explorers west. Just 40 years later, in 1492 AD, Christopher Columbus set sail, seeking a new route to Asia. The world that emerged after 1453 was modern, global, and profoundly changed. Mehmed II, now known as Mehmed the Conqueror, made Constantinople his capital, renaming it Istanbul. The city became the jewel of the Ottoman Empire, bridging continents, religions, and cultures for centuries to come. The fall of Constantinople was more than the end of a city. It was the end of an empire that called itself Roman, the last spark of the ancient world. Yet from its ashes rose legends, the marble emperor, the angel in the Hagia Sophia, and the prophecy of rebirth. It was also the beginning of a new age, one of discovery, empire, and global transformation. That brings an end to our lovely time together. Thank you so much for joining us in this two-part journey into the past. Here at Untold Parallels, we explore not only what happened, but what people believed, feared, and hoped in those moments. The echoes of the past still shape the world we live in today.